Hey guys, it's Lauren from mamarobinson.com. If you don't know me, I blog about parenting from a natural perspective as well as sharing advice and different ideas to make motherhood go a little bit more smoothly. Today we are talking about a little bit more of a serious topic. We're talking about miscarriage. I did write a couple blogs before this, sharing my two experiences with my two different miscarriages. So be sure to go and check those out if you want some encouragement or want to know from the perspective of somebody who's had a miscarriage kind of what goes on and how different each experience can be. I'll be sure to put the links for that down below in the description. Today we are going to be talking more about how to help somebody through a miscarriage, things you can do to be supportive to them. And it actually took me a long time to get this blog written because I realized that the first time I wrote it, it came across as a little bit harsh, and that is not my intention. That is not the tone that I want to have. There's enough meanness and negativity out in the world, and I do not want any of that to come from me ever. So I really wanted to make sure that I got this right, which is part of the reason that I'm doing a video, because I know that tone of voice comes across differently in video than it does just being written down. But if you do prefer the written version, I'll have that on the blog as well. So this is a topic that I really think we need to normalize talking about. Unfortunately, a lot of times when people have miscarriages, they don't talk about it. And that's okay if that was you. Some people prefer not to talk about it, and they just want to grieve privately and just not have to talk about it too much, and that's okay if that's you. But I never want it to be where people don't talk about it because they're afraid of what people will say, or that they feel like they're just not supposed to talk about it or not welcome to talk about it. So that's why I want to open up the conversation, because some people do want to share their story, and a lot of people do need support, but they're not getting it because they're grieving privately because they just feel like that's what they're supposed to do. So in part one, I shared the story of our first miscarriage, and with that one at first we did keep it a secret. It was just too painful to talk about at the time, but then after about a month or so went by, we decided we were ready to share with some people, and we did that, and I shared in that story just how we didn't really get any support. We just got a lot of blank stares. Nobody really knew how to react. Nobody followed up with us. Nobody asked how we were doing, and it was really hard because it took a lot of emotional energy and effort to open up to people like that, and it took a kind of a step of courage to do that, and then we just weren't really responded to very well. And then I also shared in part two of my second miscarriage that I had a few months ago, and just how different the experience was. People really rallied around us. We had people checking in on us. People brought us meals, and the experience was so drastically different. So I realized that everybody's experience is highly different. And I want to open up the conversation so that more people have the experience that I had with the second miscarriage, and not as many people have the experience that I did the first time around, because I don't want anybody to ever have to go through that. A lot of people just don't know how to respond, and it's just one of those things where if you've never been through it before, it is kind of hard to know, and that's why we're talking about this. I was just talking to a friend the other day who recently had a stillbirth at, I think, 20 weeks. She went in for her ultrasound and the baby's heart wasn't beating, and that was a while ago. And then when I had my miscarriage just a few months ago, she heard about it, and the other day I was talking to her and she said, "Lauren, I had no idea that you had a miscarriage before this one." She said, I mean, you probably told me. She said, but I'd never been through it, and I think it just completely went over my head, and I really underestimated how hard that is for somebody to go through before I went through it myself. And I totally get that. I've been there before too. I did not always know how to respond, and I know that I could have done better, and I wish that somebody would have talked to me and told me how to support someone, because I just thought, oh, they just don't want to talk about it, so I'll leave them alone and just let them grieve on their own. And sometimes that's what people need, but a lot of times it's not. So we're going to talk about the steps of how to go through this with somebody. Okay, so my first tip is to let them grieve in their own way. I already touched on this a little bit, but some people do want to grieve privately, but some people also want to talk about it. So how do you know how they want to grieve? You ask them. Ask them if they want to talk about it. If they don't, it's okay. Be respectful of that. Maybe check in on them again a couple months later because, they might be ready to talk about it then. But some people will be ready to talk about it. So, when you ask them, how they're doing, that really shows them that you are ready to listen. But also keep in mind that there are other ways to support someone besides just talking. And we'll get to that down below. But just because somebody doesn't want to talk about it, don't just leave them high and dry right there. You can do other things too. Okay, so tip number 2, words matter. And this one is going to be hard for some people, and this is where some people might feel a little bit offended. My intention is not to offend anybody. Please don't feel bad or guilty if you've said any of these things to someone. If you just didn't know, I've probably said some of these things before. But we're just talking about it so we can learn what's helpful and what isn't. But, sometimes we really do say some things to people, and a lot of times we might be well-intentioned, but it's actually not all that helpful. So we'll start with some of the things that maybe you shouldn't say, and then we'll get into what you can say instead. So starting with what you shouldn't say is, don't worry, you'll have another baby someday. I know, I get what people are trying to do. They're trying to be encouraging and say, yeah, you're going to have another one. But yeah, sometimes that can come across as a little bit dismissive, like we don't want to acknowledge the current loss. Because the point is that we lost this baby and we're grieving this baby. And even when we do hopefully someday get pregnant again with another baby, rainbow babies are such a blessing. Sadie is our rainbow baby. She really is such a blessing, but she's not a replacement for the baby that we lost. I still remember the baby that we lost before Sadie all these years later. So that's just something to keep in mind. Right. Another thing that you should probably not say is, at least you already have one baby, or at least you know that you can get pregnant. Because again, it comes across as a little bit dismissive. Yes, I'm so thankful for Sadie. She is such a blessing and such a joy. But the point isn't that I already have a baby. I'm still grieving my other child. So it's kind of like, if somebody lost an older child who was already born, we would never say to them, oh, well, at least you have other kids, right? Right? That would be, that wouldn't be very nice. But we just don't think about it for some reason when it's a miscarriage. So yes, they may have other kids, but they're still grieving this one. Right. Another thing that you should not say is, at least it happened early. Right. I had a miscarriage at 6 weeks, and I also had a miscarriage at 13 weeks. The one that I had at 6 weeks was still extremely difficult. And, some people feel like the later miscarriages are a little bit harder because they had more time to attach to the baby emotionally, but that's not the case for everybody. Some people say if it was like a second trimester loss, they actually feel a little bit better with the later miscarriages because they were able to hold the baby and had a little bit more closure. It really just depends on the person. Everybody processes it differently. Everybody experiences it differently. But I can tell you that even the early ones are extremely difficult because you already had so many plans in your mind for that baby. You were already envisioning holding that baby. We were already setting up the nursery for our baby when we had the miscarriage at 13 weeks. So again, just highly individual. I would steer away from any comments that sound a little bit dismissive, like we're not acknowledging how hard it is for somebody to go through this. Another phrase to avoid saying is maybe something was wrong with the baby. I have had people tell me this, and I know what they're trying to get at. They're trying to like kind of remove some of the guilt that comes along with the miscarriage, and maybe this just happened to protect you from having a harder life or a harder road ahead of you. But to us, that kind of implies that if we did have a baby that had health problems or special needs, that we wouldn't love and care for that baby the same way. So, whether there were chromosomal abnormalities or something else, that parent was still very much attached to their baby, and they still very much loved that baby. And it's still a very significant loss, and they're still grieving. Another thing you shouldn't say is you need to get over it, or it's time to move on. It kind of seems unthinkable to me that anybody would say that. Nobody has said this to me, by the way, but I do know some people who have had stuff like that said to them. Miscarriage isn't something that you get over quickly. Really, I don't think you ever, quote unquote, get over it. Yeah, you move on with life because you have to. But it's been, I think, 4 years since my first miscarriage. I still remember that baby. I've moved on with life, but I still remember him. I still think about him. I've had people message me after I started this blog series saying that they still think about their babies that they lost from 20 plus years ago. So moms don't forget their kids, and everybody's grieving process is different. Some people might need a little bit more time, and that just kind of goes back to allowing people to grieve in their own way and allowing them the time and the space that they need. Another thing that I ask you to please not do, and this will be the last one of the don'ts, is to say, oh, it was God's will for you to lose your baby, or, God needed your baby in heaven or something. I think it makes God out to be the bad guy, and I don't know, this is a little bit controversial one, I guess, depending on different beliefs and how you believe about this kind of stuff. But, I do believe in God, and I believe that He wants the best for us, but I don't believe that He takes life. I believe that we live in a fallen world, and unfortunately, things like this happen, and we're never going to completely understand why. But I don't believe that God took my baby. And sometimes stuff like that can kind of leave us with some bitter feelings toward God. So I don't know, it's just... Okay, so that's not a comprehensive list of the don'ts, but I think you guys get the idea. Those are some of the common phrases that people say. So what are some things that we can say instead that would maybe be a little bit more supportive and a little bit more encouraging? Number one, I'd say just say, I'm so sorry for your loss. I wish I knew what to say. It's simple, it's straightforward. It's okay if you don't know what to say, and it's okay to just tell them that. Honestly, they'll probably appreciate it. We had people say that to us, and I was like, yes, it's okay that you don't know what to say, but thank you so much for acknowledging that this is hard for me and for acknowledging the loss that we had. The second one that I would say to tell people is it's not your fault. I had people tell me this with both of my miscarriages, and I needed to hear it because as moms, we just somehow tend to blame ourselves. We always think, if I had eaten a little bit differently, if I hadn't done this activity, would that have helped? And we always just think, what could we have done differently? What did I do to cause this? What's wrong with my body that I can't carry a baby? And it's not our fault, but that's what moms do. We just blame ourselves. So it's really comforting to just have people affirm for you, this isn't your fault. There's nothing that you could have done. Unfortunately, these things, they happen. Another good thing to tell people, if you've been praying for them, please tell them. After our first miscarriage, we had to express to some people that, we told people about our miscarriage and nobody came to support us. Nobody offered to pray with us. Nobody said any words of encouragement. Nobody brought us any meals or anything along those lines. And we had some people say, well, I was praying for you. And I'm like, why didn't you tell me that? So please, guys, if you've been praying for somebody, tell them, because it's really encouraging for people to hear that they're not in this alone, and that we do have people rallying behind us even when we don't see it. Other thing you can say, I can't imagine how hard this must be for you. Do you want to talk about it? I'm here to listen. Those are all good things to say, because if you haven't been through a miscarriage before, you can't imagine how hard it is for somebody. And just to tell them, I know that this is difficult, even though that I don't understand. Is there anything that I can do? Lastly, if you've had a miscarriage before, consider telling your story. I know sometimes we feel like maybe we shouldn't tell our story because we don't want to take away from that person's moment, but I know sometimes we feel like maybe we shouldn't tell our story, or we wonder whether we should because we don't want to take away from that person's moment of grieving and make it about us. But you're not making it about you. You're just sharing that, yeah, I went through this too, and you're not alone. Okay, so tip number 3 is respect their right to make their own healthcare choices. I know some people might want to pursue further testing. Some might want to just leave things where they are and wait and see. Some people, they might want to go get an ultrasound to see what's going on if, say, they started bleeding or something. Some people might want to wait and see. Some people prefer, OBGYNs or the more medical route. Some people are like me and prefer a more natural route. I prefer home birth midwives and naturopathic doctors, and that's a discussion for another video. But we do kind of prefer that more holistic care like that. One thing that we ran into is we had a lot of people really pushing us to go to the ER. And I touched on this a little bit with my last blog, telling about my second miscarriage, but we couldn't get in for an ultrasound at any doctor's offices, and people kept trying to push us to go to the ER to get an ultrasound. And we really didn't need to go to the ER. There are appropriate reasons to go to the ER when you're having a miscarriage, like if you suspect an ectopic pregnancy, or if there's concerns of infection, or if you're just bleeding way too much. But we didn't have any of those concerns, and going there just for an ultrasound would have cost us a lot of money because we don't have insurance. And I know some people say, oh, well, you can apply for assistance or whatever. And yeah, you can. But unfortunately, you don't know until after you go how much assistance they're going to give you, if any, and you'll probably still be responsible for a pretty good portion of the bill. I went to the ER once, not for a miscarriage, for something else. But we went to the ER once without insurance, and we got a bill in the mail for over $10,000. And thankfully we were able to apply for assistance, but we still had to pay several $1,000s even with that assistance. And had we made just a few $1,000s more that previous year, then we would have been responsible for the entire bill. So just be careful not to push things like that, because you don't know somebody's financial situation. You don't really know all the ins and outs of their beliefs a lot of times, and why they might prefer a specific type of care. And that really is their decision. I prefer not to go to hospitals. That's just me. But if somebody else wants to go to a hospital, I would never pressure them or try to make them feel bad about it, because that was what they felt that they needed to do. And they had the right to make that choice, and it might have very well been the best choice for them. So just be mindful of that different people do make different healthcare choices, and they have the right to do that. Thankfully, with my miscarriage, the route I went is because I couldn't get in for an ultrasound anywhere, I just had to wait and see what was going to happen, whether or not it actually was a miscarriage. At 13 weeks, there was nothing they could have done to save my baby, and there really wasn't anything they would have done for me either. With my particular situation. So we waited to see. And then when we did have the miscarriage, we had a wonderful home birth midwife. She came out to our house and helped us. I was losing a lot of blood, so that was one of the concerns where, maybe I might have needed to go to the ER, but because we had someone skilled there to help us and knew how to slow it down, that we didn't have to go do that. So I was getting care. It just wasn't the traditional care that a lot of people think about. But so just remember there's other options, and some people choose those. You might think that they're not getting help when they actually are. It just looks a little bit different. Okay, tip number 4 is to pray with them. If you're a Christian, if you believe in prayer, offer to pray with them right there. A lot of times I think we have a bad habit of saying, oh my goodness, I'm going to be praying for you, but then we never actually do. And we probably do have good intentions when we say that. I know I've done it before. We have good intentions, but we just walk away and we just don't remember to pray for them. So I like to stop with people and pray with them right there. Or if you have been praying for them while they haven't been present, then let them know that you've been praying for them, like we said earlier. Tip number 5 is offer to help. And this is something that we, I guess, sometimes don't think about if we haven't had a miscarriage, because we don't realize what all is involved with it. But it actually does take a long time. Women go through postpartum bleeding just like they do after they have a baby. A lot of times you have to deliver the baby. It's really hard on the body because you go through labor, basically. And on top of having to heal physically, you're dealing with all of the emotional part of it and just the grieving process. And it really does make it difficult to do the normal responsibilities that you would have day to day, like washing dishes or going to the grocery store or making dinner. So people really do need help, and a great way to support someone is to offer that help. But here's the deal, guys. With offering to help people, it's important to be specific about how you intend to help. If you just offer to help and you say like, hey, if you need anything, let me know, a lot of times people aren't going to receive that help and aren't actually going to ask because they don't know if you really mean it, or they might just be a little bit shy to ask, or they don't know what to ask for just because of decision fatigue and all the emotions that are going on. But if you say something specific like, hey, I'd really like to bring you guys dinner tonight, give me your Chipotle order, I'll bring you guys dinner, or I'm going to go to the store. What do you need? What do you need me to pick up from the store? Do you want to do a Walmart grocery pickup and I'll go and pick it up for you? Do you want me to wash your dishes? Hey, I'd love to babysit the kids for you so you can get some rest. Those are all things that you can offer. And, if you're specific about how you intend to help, people are a lot more likely to take you up on it. Tip number 6, let people know that you're thinking of them. It's amazing what sending a card or a text or some flowers or anything like that can do to encourage people. Tip number 7, my last and final piece of advice for helping someone through a miscarriage and supporting them is to make sure that you follow up. 2 or 3 months later, ask them how they're doing. Sometimes we're really good at asking someone how they're doing that first week or 2, but then we just kind of move on and forget about it and assume that they're moving on too. But I can assure you that they're still thinking about it and they're probably still struggling. Sometimes when we ask somebody at first, they might not be ready to talk about it, but a few months later, maybe they're ready now. Or sometimes you ask them about it at first, and they really do think that they're okay, but after having a few months to process, they start to struggle. And having somebody follow up with you really does let you know that, hey, people are still thinking about me. I'm still supported. I'm not alone. And it's really helpful to do that, because otherwise people really do feel forgotten about and they're struggling on their own because nobody's following up. All right, I want to open up the conversation in the comments. If you've had a miscarriage, what are some things that people said to you that were helpful or did for you that were helpful, or things that weren't helpful? Let us know so we can help some people out and show them how to support people in a miscarriage. Maybe you haven't had a miscarriage and you just have further questions about how you can be more supportive. Let us know in the comments below. we're happy to talk about it with you. If you liked this video, if it was helpful for you, be sure to give it a thumbs up. Be sure to subscribe. Both of those things really do help the channel and help the blog as well. Thank you so much, guys.